Good morning, guys. I hope I'm audible. प्रतीक, आवाज आ रही है? गुड मॉर्निंग. तो रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857 में we have discussed almost all the topics, beginning with the causes for the revolt, the spread and extent of the revolt, the storm centers and the leaders of the revolt, the consequences of the revolt also we have covered. And now the nature of the revolt of 1857, right? So as we had discussed yesterday, there are primarily two dominant positions at two different extremes. One is the colonial position, and the other is the nationalist position. Right? Colonial historians क्या emphasize करते हैं? That the revolt was primarily a simple sepoy mutiny. It did not have any popular content. That it was the result of religious conflict. That it was born out of racial hatred by the blacks of India towards the whites of Britain. They argue in the same vein that it was both planned as well as unplanned. They try to frame the revolt of the sepoys as a betrayal of British trust. So it was sudden, unexpected, and a betrayal. So their agenda is quite clear. They want to reserve the moral high ground for the British while trying to demonize the revolt of 1857 as a barbaric uprising. They also want to shield the British Empire in India from the guilt of misruling Indians. Thus they emphasize that it was a simple sepoy mutiny and did not have any prominent participation from the general population, because that would have meant that general discontent was responsible. On the other hand, nationalist position क्या है? That it was a national uprising. That it was revolutionary. That the anger of the Indians towards the British was not because of their religion or their race, rather it was because of colonial exploitation. That the revolt was politically motivated and its objective was to expel the British from India, and it involved large scale violence which lasted for more than 1 year, and thus it was a war of independence. Like the American War of Independence. ठीक है? तो इनका ये पोजीशन है. but reality lies somewhere in between. इनके बीच में कहीं पे है. Right? According to this balanced approach, the revolt of 1857 was something more than a sepoy mutiny, but definitely not a national war of independence. These historians have challenged both the colonial position as well as the nationalist position by focusing upon the factual aspects of the revolt. For example, they say that in many places the civilian population was as high or even higher than the participation of the sepoys, right? So civilian participation was extremely high. But at the same time, they say that it cannot be a national uprising because not all parts of India participated and not all classes of Indians participated. Many Indians in fact remained loyal, and it was the Indian backing that helped the British suppress the rebellion. Okay? So there was large civilian participation, but it was not यूनिवर्सल. ठीक है. Further, it has been pointed out that to frame this uprising as a national uprising would be assigning the presence of nationalism to the political character of India at this point of time. It has been pointed out that nationalism was an imported idea that had just started to emerge among Indians, a very small section of Indians concentrated in the cities such as Bombay, Madras, Calcutta, Pune, etc. At this point of time, it was not a widespread ideology. Therefore, it could not be a nationalistic uprising. Okay? So, nationalism was in its embryonic stage. And while it was definitely anti-colonial in its content, this anti-colonialism was the manifestation of the last struggle of Indian feudalism against British imperialism. So, leaders such as Pandit Nehru and Maulana Azad have characterized the revolt as a primarily feudal reaction to British imperialism. Maulana Azad further points out that since Indian nationalism was not strong enough, the rebels had to emphasize upon parochial identities such as their religion, language, caste, region, etc. ठीक है? That is feudal identities के ऊपर उनका ज़्यादा focus था. In the name of those things, the revolt was being organized. It has further been pointed out by historians such as S.B. Chaudhary that while the feudal elements were dominant, undertones of nationalism were definitely present. And this is because although the rebels did not see themselves properly as part of the same nation, they definitely saw the British as a complete nation because of their alien and exploitative character, right? और nationalism जो है it is a relative concept. आप दूसरे को देखते हो कि वो एक nation है, those people are coming into your country exploiting you. They have been doing that for the past 100 years. They have been eroding your governance, they have been attacking your society, your religion, your economy has been completely ruined by them. Then in contrast to that other nation, the other nation, your sense of nationalism starts to emerge. तो आप अलग अलग टीमों में लोगों को बांट देते हो कि उनका टीम है, ये हमारा टीम है. इन दिस वे, although Indian nationalism had not emerged as a well-formed ideology as at this point of time, but this sense of belonging to a separate group was definitely present. So Indian versus British वाला idea definitely present था, although जो Indian वाला idea था that was not very well formed. वो अभी nebulous stage में था. Nationalism was still in its embryonic stage. ठीक है. It has further been pointed out that while these nationalistic undertones were present, whereas the revolt was primarily a feudal phenomena, at the same time the impact that it had on the Indian national movement could not be overlooked. That although it was a proto-nationalistic uprising, but in the minds of India's nationalist scholars and leaders during the early 20th century, that means 1900 to 1947, it was definitely the first war of independence. So Indian nationalists looked towards the uprising of 1857 as an inspiring movement of national reaction and rejection of colonial exploitation. तो उनके लिए उनकी स्ट्रगल की शुरुआत वहां से होती है. ठीक है. So that also needs to be kept in mind. Then it has further been pointed out that the answer of whether it was a general revolt or it was simply a sepoy mutiny is not a black and white kind of equation. Reality कहीं बीच में exist करती है. So it began as a mutiny of sepoys who were motivated by religion, but it ended as a general revolt by the common people of India. And thus the revolt of 1857 should more accurately be characterized as a merger of two distinct types of grievances, that is military grievances and general or popular grievances. ठीक है. So जो ये नया breed of historians है that has completely reinterpreted the revolt of 1857, its character, its nature, and shed a new light upon it, resulting in the emergence of a new framework regarding the revolt of 1857. It also highlights the flaws in both the colonial as well as nationalist inspirations, nationalist interpretations, and at the same time it highlights their motivated version of history writing. तो उनका हिस्ट्री राइटिंग जो था वो डिस्पैशनेट नहीं था. अंग्रेज अपना एजेंडा फुलफिल कर रहे थे, नेशनलिस्ट अपने लिए अपना एजेंडा फुलफिल करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे बाय इंटरप्रेटिंग द रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857. क्लियर है. तो पूरा डिबेट यही है. लेट अस क्विकली राइट दिस डाउन. गिव द हेडिंग नेचर ऑफ द रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857. Write down. The revolt of 1857 is one of the most important chapters in modern Indian history. Full stop. Understandably, a divergence of views exists among historians regarding its nature. And generating a consensus is difficult. Full stop. Next point. Broadly, there are two extreme positions regarding this issue. Number 1 and 2. Number 1, the colonial historians tend to characterize it as a simple sepoy mutiny. Number 2, on the other hand, nationalist scholars frame it as a national war of independence. Next point, main point. Recent research concludes that the reality lies somewhere in the middle. Full stop. Next point. The different views regarding the nature of the revolt are as follows. सबसे पहले जो ब्रिटिश हिस्टोरियंस हैं या फिर ब्रिटिश स्कॉलर्स एंड ऑब्जर्वर्स हैं उनके व्यूज. गिव सब हेडिंग. नंबर 1, British scholars or officials. और इसमें लिखो ए. जॉन लॉरेंस सीली एंड Mallison. John Lawrence, Seeley and Mallison. Characterize it as a selfish sepoy mutiny. Characterize it as a selfish sepoy mutiny. इसके अंदर लिखो according to them it enjoyed no political leadership or popular support ठीक है. Next point. However, this view has been challenged on the grounds that the uprising may have started as a mutiny of soldiers but did not remain confined to it. ठीक है. That means the common people of India also joined the revolt. Next point. Further, it should also be kept in mind that the mutiny did not affect the entire army. A major portion remained loyal to the British. ठीक है. So on these two grounds this position has been rejected. B. J.G. Medley. opines that the revolt was a racial struggle for supremacy between whites and blacks. ठीक है. Next point. This has also been rejected because even if it is true that all whites were on one side, the same cannot be said for the blacks of India. ठीक है. Next point. More precisely, it was a struggle between blacks and black supported whites. ठीक है. Next point. if anything, comma, racial consciousness affected the British mind far more profusely than the Indian mind. British mind far more profusely than the Indian mind. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट लिखो सी, अकॉर्डिंग टू T.R. Holmes, the revolt represented a conflict between civilization and barbarism. A conflict between civilization and barbarism. ठीक है, full stop. Holmes has tried to frame it as a conflict between the Occident and the Orient. ओरिएंट का मतलब ईस्टर्न सिविलाइजेशन, ऑक्सीडेंट का मतलब वेस्टर्न सिविलाइजेशन. So he has tried to frame it within the framework of a clash of civilizations. This is an idea that has been prominent in Western history writing ever since the time of Herodotus, who was writing about the conflict between Alexander and Cyrus of Persia, Darius of Persia, right? तो उस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट का ही ये मॉडर्न वर्जन था अकॉर्डिंग टू टी.आर. होम्स. और जहां पर he is using the term civilization, which one do you think he is referring to, the western civilization or the eastern civilization? अपने वालों को वेस्ट को सिविलाइज बोलेंगे और ईस्ट को क्या बोल रहे हैं, बारबैरिक, राइट? तो बारबैरिज्म वाज इक्विवेलेंट टू द ओरिएंटल सिविलाइजेशन, द इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन, ईस्टर्न सिविलाइजेशन, while civilization was equivalent to the western civilization according to him. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. However, this viewpoint reeks of narrow racism. Next point. While overlooking the atrocities committed by the British upon Indians, of the British against Indians, comma, it focuses upon the so-called barbarism of Indians against European women and children, alone. next point. In reality, the revolt witnessed barbarity from both sides. ठीक है? And thus it is not fair to paint only one side as barbaric. दोनों उसमें involved थे. So this is the third British point of view. Next, according to L.E.R. Rees, the revolt was a religious war against Christians. Was a religious war against Christians. Write down. According to him, religious justification was given by Indians to commit atrocities against Christians. Full stop. Next point. However, this position has also been rejected on the grounds that both sides used religious rhetoric to justify their actions. Full stop. Next point. However, religion had little influence over the material interests of either side. So idea is that they use religion in order to justify their actions, to attack the opponent, but they were not fighting only in the name of religion alone. Yes, religion may have been one of the causes, but it was simply that one of the causes, was never the main cause. जो Indian discontent है against the British, that was deep seated and had various causes. It was quite varied, right? तो ये हो गया religious war against Christians. And finally we have certain other British officials such as James Outram and William Taylor, who have tried to characterize it as a Hindu-Muslim conspiracy against British rule. Hindu-Muslim conspiracy against British rule. Right? किधर पॉइंट करते हैं ये? Towards Hindu-Muslim unity and their common action, their common leadership which was directed against the British, right? However, this viewpoint has also been rejected on the grounds that there is little evidence for any major conspiracy. ठीक है, इनफैक्ट जैसे हम आगे डिस्कस करने वाले हैं that during the trial of Bahadur Shah Zafar also the British tried their best to portray Bahadur Shah Zafar as a master planner, as the mastermind behind the revolt of 1857, but कोई evidence ही नहीं मिला उसके लिए. इनफैक्ट even among the other rebels जहाँ पे हिंदूज एंड मुस्लिम्स एक दूसरे के साथ कोऑपरेट कर रहे थे, वहां पे भी they found that their unity was of a more organic nature. They were united not because of any pre-planning, rather because of their hatred towards the British. Write down. Next point. In fact, unity between Hindus and Muslims was primarily a function of the unpopularity of British rule, rather than any religious alliance to overthrow the British. ठीक है, तो ये हैं 5 dominant points of view expressed by the British scholars or officials. एक पैराग्राफ और लिखो, नेक्स्ट मेन पैराग्राफ. The British historians were clearly interested in securing the moral high ground for themselves. Thus, their interpretations needed objective scrutiny. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट आते हैं nationalist historians. Write down. In contrast to the British historians, nationalist scholars such as, कुछ नाम याद रहने चाहिए आपको, वी.डी. सावरकर, के.सी. पनिक्कर, जे.सी. विद्यालंकर, and Ashok Mehta have tried to portray the revolt of 1857 as a well-planned war of independence, a well-planned war of independence, comma, a nationalist uprising, a nationalist uprising, and as the first war of Indian independence. As the first war of Indian independence. Okay? Next point. From the early 20th century, comma, nationalist leaders began looking towards the revolt as an inspiring movement, They interpreted it as a people's revolt, and its leaders as nationalist leaders. Next point. The prominent views of this perspective are as follows. A. V.D. Savarkar and Ashok Mehta have portrayed the revolt as the first war of Indian independence, and a nationalist movement respectively. Similarly, next B. Similarly, K.C. Panikkar emphasized that the aim of the revolt was to expel the British and establish a national state. Full stop. Thus, national state. Thus, it was a national movement rather than an ordinary uprising. See, Lala Lajpat Rai in his young India, Young India was the name of his publication. Described the revolt as a political as well as national uprising. Political as well as national uprising. And finally, Subhash Chandra Bose also regarded the revolt as a national uprising rather than a sepoy mutiny. In 1870, the future British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli while speaking from the floor of the House of Commons characterized the revolt as India's national revolt. Now, while he was making this address, his party, the Conservative Party, was in opposition, and he was criticizing the Whig Party, during whose tenure in Britain the revolt had taken place. So he was criticizing the policies of his political opponents, which had resulted in this major uprising. So in that context, he had characterized it as India's national revolt. But in any case, this was the first time that a major prominent British politician had publicly admitted that it was a national revolt rather than a simple sepoy mutiny. He called upon the British to adopt a very strict stance towards the Indians in order to prevent a future such uprising. So ऐसा नहीं है that he was driven by any positive agenda towards Indians. He did not want to improve the conditions of Indians. Rather, he wanted the British to strengthen their control, and he was criticizing the loose policy of the ruling Whig party. Okay? But point remains that he characterized it as India's national revolt. Right? Now, यहाँ पे flaw क्या दिख रहा है आपको? That while the colonial historians took an extreme position, in order to respond to them, these nationalist historians also took the other extreme position. Write down. Next paragraph likho. The nationalist interpretation, the main paragraph, ye ho gaya khatam 5. The nationalist interpretation also suffers from lack of objectivity. From lack of objectivity. Stop. In their enthusiasm to prop up the revolt, as the starting point of India's national struggle against colonialism, comma, they overlooked certain important facts regarding the nature and character of the revolt. Full stop. Thus, their position also needs to be evaluated critically. ठीक है? Also needs to be evaluated critically. Third subheading दो. Recent historiography or balanced perspective. Write down. Post-independence, Indian historians conducted extensive research into the revolt and reinterpreted its character. Full stop. Prominent among them were R.C. Majumdar, S.N. Sen, and S.B. Chaudhary. Next point. Apart from them, certain political figures such as Jawaharlal Nehru and Maulana Abul Kalam Azad have also questioned the nationalist perspective. Have also questioned the nationalist perspective. Next point, according to Jawaharlal Nehru, A करके लिखना, according to Jawaharlal Nehru, the revolt was essentially a feudal reaction to British imperialism. Feudal reaction to British imperialism. Full stop. He says in the discovery of India, that the leadership came from feudal background, and was motivated by a narrow feudal vision. Full stop. Next point. They exploited the general feeling of discontent to their own advantage. ठीक है. Next point. At the same time he concedes that nationalistic undertones were present in the revolt of the sepoys and the commoners. ठीक है. तो क्लासिकल मार्क्सिस्ट पोजीशन जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने लिया है दैट जो लीडरशिप था रिवोल्ट का, दैट हैज बीन क्रिटिसाइज्ड बिकॉज ऑफ इट्स फ्यूडल कैरेक्टर. तो क्लास डिस्टिंक्शन के ऊपर एम्फेसाइज किया गया है दैट द रेबल्स वर आल्सो divided among themselves on the basis of primarily class. The feudal class was interested only by its feudal objectives, the restoration of their pensions or their lands or their privileges or their power, etc. They were able to take advantage of the general feeling of discontent of the ordinary Indians और उनके reaction, उनके जो grievances हैं उनको उन्होंने बोला है कि उसमें nationalistic undertones present थे. ठीक है. So this is what he has said. B. Maulana Azad has pointed to the selfish and characterless leadership of the movement that was wholly unpatriotic, that was wholly, WHOLLY, wholly unpatriotic. And driven by narrow interests, by narrow dynastic and class interests, dynastic and class interests. ठीक है, तो he also mirrors the sentiments of जवाहरलाल नेहरू. फर्दर इन्होंने बोला है, नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो, फर्दर in the absence of nationalism, the rebels organized along the lines of religion and caste, thus the uprising cannot be regarded as a nationalist uprising, लेकिन साथ में इस अपराइजिंग के लिए ब्लेम किसको किया है इन्होंने? Has he blamed the Indians or the British? The British for their exploitation. Next point, at the same time Maulana Azad has assigned the blame for the revolt to British exploitation. Assigned the blame for the revolt to British exploitation. ठीक है, सी लिखो, R.C. Majumdar in his book, किताब का नाम है The Sepoy Mutiny and the Revolt of 1857 argues that it was, क्या बोला इन्होंने? Neither the first nor national nor a war of independence. Neither the first nor national nor a war of independence. What is the basis of his interpretation? पहला क्यों नहीं था? It was neither the first sepoy mutiny nor the first general revolt against the British. A long series of mutinies as well as revolts had taken place before this revolt, and a number of them took place even subsequently. Okay, so write down. Next point. The 1857 uprising was neither the first mutiny nor the first popular revolt against the British. Nor the first popular revolt against the British. Full stop. Instead, it was the most powerful one in a long series of violent outbreaks against colonial exploitation. ठीक है, against colonial exploitation. पहला नहीं था. Why did he say that it was not a national uprising? केवल नॉर्थ इंडिया में कन्फाइंड था, सारी क्लासेस इन्वॉल्व नहीं थी, लीडरशिप के पास कोई नेशनल विजन नहीं था, और सेंटिमेंट ऑफ नेशनलिज्म अभी इंडिया में एम्ब्रियोनिक स्टेज में था. जो इसमें एक्चुअली रिवोल्ट में लोग लड़ रहे थे, they did not have the ideology of nationalism behind them. Write down next point. It is hard to ascribe a national character to the revolt. Ascribe a national character to the revolt due to its limited territorial extent, or territorial spread and participation. Stop. Same point में लिखो. Further, the leadership had no all India national vision. All India national vision. Rather, they were motivated by a narrow dynastic and regional vision. Dynastic and regional vision. Full stop. Same point, continue. Further, Indian nationalism was still in its embryonic stage. Still in its embryonic stage. ठीक है, तो इस वजह से it was not an uprising of a national character. And why should it not be considered as a war of independence? हाँ, क्योंकि war involves a great degree of planning and coordination, right? So कुछ नेशनलिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस ने ऐसा बोला कि नाना साहेब between March and April of 1857 traveled extensively. He traveled from Kanpur to Ambala to Jhansi and Lucknow, and revolt started immediately after he completed his circuit in May 1857. तो nationalist historians ने क्या बोला? That while he was making this extensive tour of North India, he was actually organizing the local leadership into a common alliance against the British. ठीक है? However, जो 1857 का ट्रायल हुआ ऑफ बहादुर शाह जफर, वहां पे इट वाज प्रूव्ड दैट देयर वाज नो सच कॉन्स्पिरेसी. In fact, Nana Sahib's participation in the revolt has also been questioned itself, that he was interested primarily in the restoration of his pension, and it was the sepoys who forced him, like the sepoys had forced Bahadur Shah Zafar to give them leadership at Kanpur. So he, like Bahadur Shah Zafar, was also a reluctant leader. So he was in fact not in favor of an all-out rebellion. He in fact had sent two separate missions to London to appeal to the British monarch that the pension which had been discontinued, that should be restored. So he was looking at constitutional and legal means of recourse, और अभी वो means exhaust नहीं हुए थे, सुनवाई अभी बाकी थी. So why would he act against his own interest? Why would he try to undo the legal process that he himself had started? ठीक है. So on the basis of this, it has been argued that it was not a war of independence. Secondly, जो idea है independence का, what does it mean? Does it simply mean political freedom? क्या यही मतलब होता है इसका? नहीं. It also means social and economic independence. Now, political freedom is an idea which appeals only to a very narrow section of the population, जो कि political elite होता है, कि सरकार में change हो जाए, किसी और की सरकार से हमारी सरकार आ जाए. So it is an elite phenomenon. Especially in the context of medieval history. क्यों करेंगे क्या लोग political freedom का? Suppose the revolt had succeeded and the British rule in India had been ended. What would have happened? क्या होता? The Indian rulers such as the Nawabs, the Rajas, the various Jagirdars, the Badshah, etc., they would have revived the old structure where the common people of India would still not have enjoyed any social or economic independence. They would not have enjoyed political equality. They would not have enjoyed legal freedoms. Legal equality इनके पास नहीं होती. And therefore, ये जो idea of independence है जिसके बारे में वी.डी. सावरकर बात कर रहे थे, that was a very narrow idea of independence. It was a very elite version of independence. It represented only political freedom. Rather, ये जो secular और popular democracy का idea है, that was nowhere found in the content of the revolt of 1857. इसकी बात कोई नहीं कर रहा था. So even if the revolt had succeeded in ending British rule, it would not have resulted in any secular or popular democracy. The condition of the Indian people at the ground level would largely have remained unchanged. कोई उसमें major फर्क नहीं पड़ता. So given this modern understanding of independence, could it be called as a true war of independence? नहीं. Can it be compared to the American War of Independence? Also no, क्योंकि वहां पे modern consciousness, modern liberal ideas such as popular sovereignty, constitutionalism, limited government, republicanism, the right to vote, individualism, these were the ideas, these were the ideological forces behind that war of independence. In contrast to that, जो Indian revolt था, that was a distinctly medieval phenomena. It was an distinctly elite phenomena. Clear? So on these grounds, it cannot be termed as a national war of independence either. Clear? Write down next point. अभी क्या लिखा है आपने इसमें? नेशनलिज्म तक का हो गया ना? हाँ, नेक्स्ट लिखो. फर्दर the revolt was hardly a war of independence either. Was hardly a war of independence either. Full stop. Neither did it involve elaborate planning nor did the vision of the rebels include modern ideas that are fundamental to the modern understanding of independence, such as that are fundamental to the modern understanding of independence, such as socio-economic freedom, popular sovereignty, legal and political equality, constitutionalism, legal and political equality, constitutionalism, and limited government. Full stop. Thus, it was at best an anti-colonial revolt. It was at best an anti-colonial revolt. ठीक है, तो ये पर्सपेक्टिव है आरसी मजूमदार का. नेक्स्ट, डॉक्टर सुरेंद्र नाथ सेन. Now he agrees with Dr. R.C. Majumdar in saying that planning का element involved नहीं था इसमें. So there was no elaborate planning. The Indian rebels were uncoordinated and did not have a unified vision or a strategy. But at the same time, he argues that despite these shortcomings, it was a war of independence or a revolutionary war. राइट? तो इस कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन को ओवरकम कैसे करते हैं ये? ही सेज दैट इवन इन द अमेरिकन एंड फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशंस the impetus for change was brought forward by a small minority of people जो उन मूवमेंट्स के लीडर्स थे. So he argues revolutions always begin with a small minority. It is a different matter whether this minority can gather the support of a major section of the general population or not. Okay? Going by this benchmark, the Sepoy Mutiny, which began in Meerut on the 10th of May 1857, was transformed into a revolutionary war when the sepoys arrived in Delhi and chose Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader. So a political transformation took place with that single simple act, right? Further, this revolutionary war, which was till now involving only the sepoys, after this was able to generate the support from a large section of the civilian population over an extended area from Punjab right up to Bihar, right? So it was transformed into a popular revolt. It is a different matter that unlike the American and French revolutions, the revolt of 1857 did not succeed. But even if you look at the history of the French Revolution, क्या टाइम पीरियड साइड किया जाता है उसका? 1789 से लेकर के 1815 तक. And even then, France did not arrive at a stable political consensus. Stable political structure नहीं emerge हुआ. In fact, that would emerge only after the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. जब फोर्थ फ्रेंच रिपब्लिक इमर्ज होगा, दैट मीन्स इट टुक ऑलमोस्ट 100 years, 1789 से लेकर के 1870, और उसके बाद ट्रू डेमोक्रेसी फ्रांस में इंट्रोड्यूस होगा. एंड दैट ऑल्सो इवॉल्व्ड ओवर टाइम, राइट? तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल यूनिवर्सल एडल्ट सफरेज फ्रांस में 1870 में इंट्रोड्यूस तो नहीं हुआ था. वोटिंग restrictions remained in place. Women were not allowed to vote at all, right? So these kinds of problems remained with the French Revolution. American Revolution में भी बात कर लीजिए अगर, तो अमेरिका attained independence in 1781 but did not abolish slavery until after the civil war. तो 100 साल वहां पे लग गए. उसके 100 साल बाद सिविल राइट्स मूवमेंट हुआ. 1961 में सिविल राइट्स एक्ट वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड. तो अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन का जो मेन कंटेंट है उसका टाइम पीरियड इज मोर देन 200 ईयर्स, ऑलमोस्ट 200 ईयर्स, एंड वहां पे भी प्रॉब्लम्स अभी तक परसिस्ट कर रही हैं. So these kinds of revolutions appear to be sudden, but in reality their effect ripples through time over an extended period. उसी को कंपेयर करिए जो रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857 है. जो मेन रिपल है दैट वाज क्रिएटेड इन 1857 एंड इट कंटिन्यूड टू रिपेल थ्रू टाइम ओवर द नेक्स्ट सेंचुरी एंड मोर. उसके इफेक्ट्स आज तक यहां पे फील हो रहे हैं. दैट इज व्हाट एसेंसन हैज आर्ग्यूड. ठीक है. सो वी शुड लुक एट दीज ग्राउंड शेकिंग डेवलपमेंट्स फ्रॉम अ बर्ड्स आई पर्सपेक्टिव. बहुत मायोपिक व्यू नहीं लेना चाहिए, राइट? तो उसको अगर लॉन्ग आर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री में देखेंगे वी आर गोइंग टू अप्रिशिएट इट्स ट्रू कैरेक्टर एंड इट्स ट्रू एक्सटेंट. जाओ एंड लाई से पूछा गया in 1960 that what do you think are the impacts of the French Revolution? French Revolution had started in 1789. So it had almost been 200 years कि उसके बाद पूछा गया, right? जाओ एंड लाई का रिस्पॉन्स क्या था? इट इज टू अर्ली टू टेल. अभी बहुत जल्दी है, बता नहीं सकते कि क्या उसका इम्पैक्ट पड़ा है, राइट? So that is the kind of perspective that we should take while appreciating the effects of such developments. ठीक है. ऐसा नहीं है कि तुरंत तुरंत सारे के सारे नतीजे बाहर निकल आएंगे. हाँ, कुछ चेंजेस इमीडिएटली इफेक्ट होते हैं, बट उसके जो इफेक्ट्स हैं लॉन्ग टाइम रिपरकशंस में भी मैनिफेस्ट होते हैं. So that is what has been argued. Write down. According to Dr. Esensen, while the revolt of 1857 did not involve any elaborate planning, comma, it should still be considered as a war of independence or a revolutionary war. Next point, he argues that revolutions are always mostly the work of a minority, are often mostly the work of a minority, comma, with or without popular support. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट, the revolt of 1857 transformed from a sepoy mutiny into a revolutionary war once the rebellious soldiers proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader and convinced a section of the aristocracy, a section of the aristocracy and the common population and the civil population or common population to join them, Next point. According to Dr. Sen, comma, when a rebellion wins the sympathy of a substantial majority, comma, it can claim a national character. Next point. Thus the revolt of 1857 may have started as a sepoy mutiny, comma, but it ended as a war of independence and a national revolt, ठीक है. Next point. Whereas revolutions are often characterized by sudden and tremendous change, comma, the time span over which such changes manifest is illusory, ठीक है. जिसको ऑर्डिनरी ह्यूमन बीइंग्स सडन की तरह डिस्क्राइब करते हैं, हिस्टोरियंस एक्चुअली उसको हिस्टोरिकल पर्सपेक्टिव में लेकर के चलते हैं. राइट डाउन सब पॉइंट. in the larger historical theme developments over centuries may in fact qualify as revolutionary, ठीक है. ये डिस्कशन हम एंशिएंट हिस्ट्री के समय भी कर चुके हैं when we were talking about the Neolithic revolution, right? एक डिस्कशन था ना कि न्यूलिथिक रेवोल्यूशन को एक्चुअली रेवोल्यूशनरी मानना चाहिए या नहीं मानना चाहिए, बिकॉज इट्स टाइम स्पैन लास्टेड मोर देन 3000 years. But if you compare those 3000 years and the changes that took place within it with the more than 5 lakh years before it, जो Paleolithic age था, In that context, those 3000 years appear to be a very small time frame, right? And thus the changes which took place actually constituted a revolution. जब हजारों साल को हम रेवोल्यूशन बोल सकते हैं तो व्हाई नॉट 90 इयर्स और इवन 50 इयर्स, 1857 से लेकर के 1885 तक के पीरियड को ही कंसिडर करो, नॉट इवन 30 इयर्स, एंड ओवर दैट पीरियड सेवरल रेवोल्यूशनरी चेंजेस टुक प्लेस. इंडिया में नेशनल मूवमेंट का फॉर्मल बिगिनिंग हो गया, राइट? द इंडियन आइडेंटिटी स्टार्टेड टू इमर्ज एज द डोमिनेंट आइडेंटिटी ऑफ द पीपल इनहैबिटिंग द सबकॉन्टिनेंट. And this movement continued to grow. It pushed India towards political and social modernism, economic modernism as well, right? It pulled India out of its medievalism, out of its backwardness. And ये सारे changes कब होते हैं? Immediately after the revolt of 1857. In that context, it was definitely revolutionary, right? So write down. क्या लिखा अभी आपने? In the larger historical theme, the developments over centuries may qualify as revolutionary. Next point, example: the effects of the American and French revolutions. The American and French revolutions have radiated across history over the past 2 centuries. Next point. In this context, the revolt of 1857 was definitely a revolutionary development. Okay? ठीक है. तो ये हो गया डॉक्टर एस एन सेन का पर्सपेक्टिव. फाइनली वी हैव डॉक्टर एस बी चौधरी. Write down. In his book Civil Rebellions in the Indian Mutiny, 1857 to 59, civil rebellions in the Indian Mutiny, comma, Dr. S. B. Chaudhary regards the revolt of 1857 as the coming together of two series of disturbances, resulting from किस तरह के grievances? Military grievances and civilian grievances. Write down. Resulting from military grievances and civilian grievances. and over here he aligns his views with Dr. S.N. Sen. Dr. S.N. Sen ने क्या बोला था? That small minority के जो का जो revolutionary activity होता है, if it gets sympathy from a major section of the population, then it assumes a national character. तो यहाँ पे भी वो correspond करते हैं डॉक्टर सेन से, and he says that this transformed it into something that was like a war of independence. It did not simply involve the sepoys who were aggrieved because of their service conditions. Rather, it also involved a large section of the civilian population of North India who were fed up with the constant colonial exploitation and marginalization. Write down next point. Here he corresponds with the views of Dr. Sen and argues that the merger of the military and civil disturbances transformed the revolt into something like a war of independence. But he is also more reserved than Dr. Sen. Dr. Sen ने जो differences थे between the objectives of these different disturbances उनके ऊपर emphasize नहीं किया है. He says that these civil and military disturbances were born out of individual and specific factors. दोनों के factors same नहीं थे, right? And thus जो वॉर का एजेंडा था वो यूनिलैटरल नहीं था, यूनिफॉर्म नहीं था. राइट डाउन. एट द सेम टाइम नेक्स्ट पॉइंट, एट द सेम टाइम he also points out the relatively independent motivations behind these disturbances to argue that the revolt was something less than a truly national war of independence. ठीक है. तो देखो आरसी मजूमदार ने क्या बोला है? इट वॉज नीदर द फर्स्ट नॉर नेशनल नॉर अ वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस. डॉक्टर एस एन सेन ने क्या बोला है? प्लानिंग तो नहीं थी बट इट वॉज डेफिनेटली अ वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस बिकॉज ऑफ इट्स पॉपुलर कैरेक्टर. एस बी चौधरी ने क्या बोला है? पॉपुलर कैरेक्टर तो था बट पॉपुलर कैरेक्टर में दो अलग अलग टाइप्स ऑफ डिस्टर्बेंसेस इन्वॉल्व थे, दैट इज मिलिट्री डिस्टर्बेंसेस एज वेल एज सिविल डिस्टर्बेंसेस, and both of them were born out of different motivations, different objectives. So therefore it was more than a simple sepoy mutiny but something less than a war of national independence. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट कंक्लूजन लिख सकते हो. On the basis of this discussion, comma, it can be said that the revolt was definitely more than a simple sepoy mutiny. than a simple sepoy mutiny. Full stop. It involved the participation of several sections of the civilian population, including rulers, zamindars, peasants, artisans, and petty traders, apart from Indian sepoys. Next point. At the same time, it was also something less than the first war of national independence. It was also something less than the first war of national independence. However, its impact should not be underestimated. Subpoint. Not only did it trigger a major overhaul of the colonial regime, comma, it also emerged as a major source of inspiration for the later generation of nationalists. Okay? So it was a watershed movement not only in the colonial history of India but also in the history of the national movement. Clear? Take down a question. The revolt of 1857 was neither the first nor national nor a war of independence. Full stop. In the context of this statement, evaluate the nature of the revolt. 200 words, 15 marks. Next question. The uprising of 1857 was nothing more than a selfish sepoy mutiny having neither native leadership nor popular support. Discuss. दोनों क्वेश्चन समझ में आए हैं? कैसे अप्रोच करना है दोनों को आइडिया है? पहला वाला आरसी मजूमदार का स्टेटमेंट है, तो वहां से आप शुरू कर सकते हैं वेरी कन्वीनियंटली कि आरसी मजूमदार ने ये इंटरप्रिटेशन दिया था रिगार्डिंग द रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857. However, this interpretation needs to be appreciated in a more objective light. उसके लिए जो ब्रिटिश पर्सपेक्टिव है उसको भी समझना जरूरी है, नेशनलिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव उसको भी समझना जरूरी है. एंड देन जो आरसी मजूमदार के अगेंस्ट काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स है जो कि एसिंसन और एसबी चौधरी ने दिए हैं, दैट इट वाज एक्चुअली अ वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस या फिर इट वाज समथिंग मोर देन अ सीपॉय म्यूटनी बट लेस देन अ वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस, उसको आप एक्सपैंड करेंगे टुवर्ड्स द कंक्लूसिव पोर्शन एंड कंक्लूजन भी उसी स्टैंड को कंटिन्यू करते हुए करेंगे. Second question, the uprising of 1857 was nothing more than a selfish sepoy mutiny having neither native leadership nor popular support. Discuss. ये किसका पोजीशन है? जो कलोनियल हिस्टोरियंस हैं, सीली हो गए, टेलर हो गए, आउटरम हो गए, राइट? तो दे वर ट्राइंग टू डिमिनिश द importance of 1857. They were trying to argue that it did not enjoy any popular support. It was simply the result of a certain selfish sepoys. It was wholly unpatriotic and native population ने इसको support बिल्कुल भी नहीं किया. Native leadership भी aloof था. In fact, it helped the British in suppress the rebellion, in suppressing the rebellion because they understood the futility of this uprising. But this is patently wrong. It is inaccurate. Large scale civilian participation भी था, and the result was the revolt was the result of a large number of grievances suffered by almost every section of the population, and this explains its widespread nature, the massive civilian participation as well as the great amount of difficulty that the British faced in finally suppressing the revolt, right? तो इस बेसिस पे आपको इसको एड्रेस करना है, एनालाइज करना है. हो जाएगा? ठीक है. टेक डाउन वन मोर क्वेश्चन. The revolt of 1857 was something more than a sepoy mutiny, but something less than a national war of independence. Discuss. तो यहाँ पे क्या करना है, पूरा डिबेट है उसको इनकैप्सुलेट करना होगा. दिस इज द कॉलोनियल पोजीशन दैट इट वाज अ सीपॉय म्यूटनी. नेशनलिस्ट पोजीशन इट वाज अ नेशनल वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस. और ये जो सेंटिमेंट है दैट इट वाज समथिंग मोर देन अ सीपॉय म्यूटनी एंड लेस देन अ वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस, दिस इज गोइंग टू बी द बैलेंस, द नुआंस अप्रोच जो कि रिसेंट हिस्टोरियंस ने देने की कोशिश करी है. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन. The revolt of 1857 began as a sepoy mutiny but ended as a war of independence. Comment. $200 words. यहाँ पे भी सेम चीज एड्रेस करना है. दोनों पोजीशंस यहाँ पे दी हुई हैं. बिगैन एज अ सीपॉय म्यूटनी, एंडेड एज अ वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस. दिस इज द रीसेंट पर्सपेक्टिव. तो उसी को आपको वहां पे अराइव करना है by first discussing the colonial perspective, then the nationalist perspective, and then the balanced approach. ठीक है, next question. The revolt of 1857 was won in a long series of anti-British rebellions. Discuss critically. यहां पे क्या करना होगा बताइए. 200 वर्ड्स. इस स्टेटमेंट का एसेंस क्या है? That the revolt of 1857 was like any other ordinary revolt that had been a permanent feature of the entire history of colonial rule. There was nothing special about the revolt of 1857. This is what the basic predicate of this statement of this question is. अब हमें क्या करना है, इसको critically discuss करना है. We'll have to present certain arguments for it, but majorly हमको इसके against argue करना होगा. We'll have to show how it was a special revolt. It was not like any of the other revolts. So in what sense was it different from any of the other revolts? चाहे वो peasant rebellions हो, जो tribal revolts हों, या फिर political religious rebellions हों, या फिर feudal rebellions हों, उनसे अलग कैसे हैं? क्योंकि बाकी सारे जो रेबिलियंस हैं दे कुड नीटली बी कैटेगराइज्ड एज पेजेंट रिवोल्ट्स, एज ट्राइबल रिवोल्ट्स, एज फ्यूडल रिवोल्ट्स, एज पॉलिटिकल रिलीजियस रिवोल्ट्स. रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857 वाज अ मर्जर ऑफ ऑल दीज फीचर्स. यहाँ पे सारे फीचर्स एक साथ मैनिफेस्ट होते हैं. पेजेंट पार्टिसिपेशन भी था, ट्राइबल पार्टिसिपेशन भी था, लीडरशिप फ्यूडल था, एंड पॉलिटिको रिलीजियस एलिमेंट भी प्रेजेंट था. हिंदू मुस्लिम यूनिटी, the appeal to religious sentimentalities, the desire to defend the religion against the onslaught of Western and Christian impact, right? ये सारे elements एक साथ present होते हैं. Firstly, merger of various टाइपोलॉजीज. एक तो इस वजह से अलग था. इनफैक्ट सीपॉय म्यूटनीज भी पहले हुई थी, तो यहाँ पे सीपॉयज का भी पार्टिसिपेशन था. सेकंड, इन नो अदर रिबेलियन डिड यू सी द साइमल्टेनियस एक्सप्रेशन ऑफ बोथ सिविलियन एज वेल एज मिलिट्री डिस्टर्बेंसेस. या तो एक समय पे सिविलियन डिस्टर्बेंस होता था या फिर मिलिट्री डिस्टर्बेंस होता था। यहाँ पे दोनों एक साथ हो रहे हैं एंड वो मर्ज हो गए हैं, राइट। तो मर्जर ऑफ civilian and military disturbances. ठीक है। थर्ड, in very few other revolts did you find the level of Hindu-Muslim unity as you find over here. ठीक है। So Hindu-Muslim unity was a unique feature. In fact, in most cases क्या होता था, religious rebellions tended to devolve into open religious riots, communal riots. यहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं देखने के लिए मिला. Fourthly, the scale and spread of the movement, the level of civilian participation and the region affected, the area affected, the spread and scale of the movement was unprecedented. Fifthly, in none of the previous revolts had the ruling class, especially the uppermost echelons of the Indian ruling class, had supported the rebellion openly. यहाँ पे अलग अलग regions के नवाब्स या फिर राजास and even the Mughal emperor had accepted leadership. The rebellion was being fought in their names, right? So participation of the Indian ruling class in a popular revolt, this was a new feature. ठीक है। Sixthly, now in the case of peasant and tribal revolts, what had we seen? Class cooperation or class struggle? Class struggle हमको देखने के लिए मिलता था primarily. It was the zamindars against the peasants or the zamindars and money lenders against the tribals, etc. Right? But over here we see class cooperation at a large scale. That means traditionally hostile classes had come together in order to expel the British. They had put their internal differences on the side. And lastly, in the case of no other rebellion was the British response so immediate and so pronounced, so dramatic. So the level of British response, not only in terms of suppressing the movement, but its aftermath was never as dramatic as it had been in the case of the revolt of 1857. On the basis of this, we can comfortably argue that while it was one of the several series of revolts that had taken place throughout the British rule, and in fact it was endemic, and these series of revolts was endemic to colonial rule, the revolt of 1857 was unlike any other Indian rebellion. Okay? It enjoys a special significance in modern Indian history. It completely transformed the nation, nature of the nationalist struggle as well as the content of colonial administration. Okay? It even served as a living, living inspiration for the later generation of Indian nationalists. So 20th century में जो extremist nationalists थे, especially they were inspired by the revolt of 1857, whose leaders were revered as symbols of Indian nationalism, especially figures such as Nana Sahib, तांतिया तोपे और ये बेगम हजरत महल, रानी लक्ष्मीबाई etc. Right? They were all revered as national heroes, and they continued to inspire the younger generation of nationalists, not only during the national movement but even after that. तो अभी भी उनको heroes consider किया जाता है. So that is why it was completely different from the other kinds of revolts. ठीक है? So these are some questions. I hope you'll be able to address them. I am ending this lecture now. Next topic हमें discuss करना है the socio-religious reform movements of the 19th century. Right? Beforehand, I will try to send you some notes, and इसको हम मंडे की क्लास में टैकल करते हैं. ठीक है? 19th century socio-religious reform movements, and following that we'll get into the Indian national movement proper. ठीक है? कोई doubts? नहीं? चलिए then. Thank you for your time, guys. I'll see you in our next lecture.